when I was first visiting Catholic churches, um, I said that people were not welcoming. And so, based on my experience, what recommendations do I have to Catholic parishes to practice hospitality? So, it may not sound like a very theological question, but I think this question can have a very theological answer. Which how should we as Catholics be showing hospitality to newcomers? Because it's true, in my own conversion experience to the Catholic faith, for those who maybe aren't familiar with my journey, I converted to the Catholic faith, or well, let me back up. I converted to Christianity just kind of broadly from really atheism. So when I was raised in a nominally Lutheran household, um, but I let go of my faith around middle school age when I discovered the new atheist movement. It was kind of like at the height of the new atheist movement, especially on YouTube. Was like when I was entering like middle school and starting to like really look into the big questions, so to speak. And so I was really swept up with like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, the notorious Four Horsemen, and all of that. And yeah, so I got very swept up into online atheism, and then eventually that turned with like online politics, like the 2016 election. With all that, I got really involved in all that stuff. Maybe some people who subscribe to this channel may even remember those days when I was making videos about various political topics that I won't even talk about anymore. um, but it was in the midst of that I noticed like the trend of people who were in that kind of online political sphere. They were starting to become like Catholic and Eastern Orthodox. And I remember it was like a very consistent trend, especially like people who were in like perhaps people remember the anarcho-capitalist phase that certain portions of the internet went through. Like a lot of the ANCAPs were becoming Catholic and Orthodox. And rather than writing these treatises on economics, now all of a sudden they're writing like these treatises on like theology and why you should like believe in Christ and all these things. And I remember just being kind of like intrigued by that because I had set all that theological nonsense aside as a intelligent middle schooler, and so as I was coming to the faith, it was largely through the Catholic and Orthodox traditions. And but I realized that unlike my obsession with like politics and even like atheism, like I couldn't just keep it online. And so I was initially very drawn to Catholicism. This is back in like 2018, we're talking. I was very much drawn to Catholicism. And I'm like, okay, I guess I gotta like do something about this, go actually visit a parish, try to get involved in real life. And at this point, I'm like a very like socially awkward teenager. Like I don't have really any friends. I don't know really how to talk to people. And so the idea of like going to a place where I know absolutely nobody, and I have literally no idea what to expect, it was very jarring. So I remember I just went to like my local Catholic parish, and I don't know exactly what I was expecting to happen, but I kind of just show up there, the mass goes on. And I have no idea what's going on. I'm very confused. Like everyone's doing all these weird gestures and stuff, and I'm like completely lost. This is just like a normal Novus Ordo, like your average Novus Ordo parish, by the way. This isn't even like some trad place where there's all these extravagant rituals going on. It's actually pretty like milk toast Novus Ordo Catholicism that I was experiencing, but still, it was like so foreign to me. And I remember I just walked in, and then I just kind of like wait. I'm like kind of like waiting for something to happen, but like nothing's happening. I'm like, okay. After the mass is over, I just walk out. And as someone who is just very like socially awkward, doesn't know how to talk to people, like that was not sustainable for me at the time. So not sustainable at all. And I eventually just like stopped going because literally like of the hundreds of people there, including clergy, staff members, like there was not a single person who like came up to me, said anything to me, or tried to like tell me about like, oh, there's this like youth group you can go to or something like that. That only came when I actually started like inquiring with the deacon about RCIA. He told me about like a youth thing that was going on that I could be a part of. But at that point, I was already like, I don't know about this. It just was not jiving. And that was completely different from my experience in the Eastern Orthodox Church, right? Because obviously my inability to find that community in the Catholic Church is really the main reason why I ended up not pursuing Catholicism back in like 2018. It really had little to do with like theological stuff. Like I remember like when I reached out to the man who would become my Eastern Orthodox priest, I really was like very intellectually convinced of Catholicism. And even like after our first couple of meetings, I'm like, I'm really not buying this Eastern Orthodoxy stuff. But the reason I kept going back was because of the community. The first time I walked into an Eastern Orthodox parish, I was immediately greeted by the priest's wife. She gave me this like binder that had like all the liturgical stuff you could possibly need in it. Like they would set the binders every week, so that way they like had all of the propers for the liturgy for that particular week. Then I was sat next to a catechumen, which I didn't know what a catechumen was at the time, funny enough. But I was sat next to a catechumen, and this catechumen basically like walked me through the service and showed me what to do. And it was just like such a night and day difference between like that communal experience in Catholicism versus Eastern Orthodoxy. And that really is what drew me into the Orthodox Church. Is it was not the theological arguments or the philosophical arguments. Wasn't this intellectual stuff. It wasn't even necessarily like the spiritual tradition. I wasn't reading like these spiritual writers or anything like that. It was just, a beautiful liturgy and a very warm and welcoming community. And now I understand like why that is easier to happen in the Orthodox world than it is in the Catholic world. Just because the Orthodox Church is like minusculely small compared to the Catholic Church. I mean, if we're just being real, the like clergy to parishioner ratio is very different. Orthodox churches do not have several liturgies, like on Sundays because of the number of people they have flocking into their churches. Like the Catholic Church, just as a matter of fact, is much bigger than the Orthodox Church. And when you have so many people, it can be very difficult to have that like small community feel. And so like, in terms of like what the average Catholic parish can do to mimic that feel, I don't have a ton of practical advice other than like, if you see somebody new at mass, go up to them, greet them. It's important to have things. And I also think this is important. And this is something I didn't fully understand even when I was Eastern Orthodox, but I've come to understand more as a Catholic, which is that, the mass is not necessarily the place for newcomers, right? Like I know in like Orthodox polemics and stuff, it's very much like come and see, come to the liturgy, come and see. And it's like to an extent, yes. But at the same time, like I mean, if you go back to like the early church, like they weren't just letting people in to their liturgies. I mean, like even the catechumens were dismissed before the liturgy of the Eucharist, which obviously we don't do that anymore, and we haven't done that in a very long time. But the idea that like there's something sacred going on, that it's not just like for anyone wandering in off the street to see and observe, I think there is some wisdom to that. And I feel like we've gone to the opposite extreme where now we're like live streaming Holy Mass and putting it on the internet, and it's just basically like that. Even if it's like a very beautiful Tridentine Latin Mass, like if it's like being live streamed and recorded and all these things, like there is a kind of sacredness, kind of sacredness and a kind of mystery that is being lost there. And so this attitude that like newcomers just need to come to the mass, it's like maybe we need to create, like what in ministry we tend to call like shallow water zones, like places for people to just kind of like, get their feet wet with Catholicism and not actually, fully participate in the sacred mysteries because they're not really ready for that. Yeah, they're not ready to appreciate it. Like I remember back when I was first Catholic, I tried to explore the Tridentine Latin Mass. I just showed up at St. John Cantius Parish on a Sunday and just attended the traditional Latin Mass. I had no idea what was going on. I couldn't appreciate what I was seeing. And in fact, it turned me off from the Tridentine Mass for several years, up until like very recently. So actually, I think it had a net negative effect, me just going there and having like nobody to guide me through it, right? In the Orthodox Church, I had somebody to guide me and walk me through what was happening. So I think that's why it tended to work. There's also just the fact that the Byzantine liturgy is a lot more externally beautiful and externally extravagant than the Western liturgies are, which is, to say nothing good or bad necessarily about either one of those. That's just the reality. They just developed in different ways. And so I feel like the Byzantine tradition has a way of appealing to the senses a lot more than the Latin tradition does, at least in certain respects. And so all that to say, yeah, I don't know that like inviting somebody to mass is really the place for newcomers. Like I think having alternative like ministries, so like for example, I belong to something called Catholic Sports. Like I lead a Bible study. Like it's basically just like a sports league for like, and we call it Catholic Sports, but it's like a lot of people are into sports. It's like a good place to like get people involved and get them involved like with community, with people like closer to their own age. So I think like supporting those kinds of missions, like realizing that like we're in mission territory and we need to start acting like missionaries and like fostering communities, building like both personal and professional relationships, like supporting each other professionally. Obviously, I'm not, I don't have like a big company, big money or anything like this to do that. But people who do, like trying to foster like a Catholic economy, kind of like in what they, do down in Steubenville, like it's those kinds of community-based things that really I think are going to have to happen primarily outside of the parish, because I think the parish structure is just, for a variety of reasons, unless it got fundamentally changed, which is just not going to happen realistically. I don't think it is the place to build Catholic community. I think that largely has to happen outside of the parish structure. It has to happen in homes, in families, potluck dinners. Like lay people just need to start picking up the torch, start inviting people over, start praying the divine office, and just build their own community. Don't wait for the priests to do something. Don't wait for the bishops to do something, because they're not. They're on a sinking ship, and they've been on a sinking ship for a long time and they haven't done anything. They're not going to do anything. And so we as lay people have that vocation, right? That universal call to holiness. Ironically, like what it actually means, right, is that we're supposed to live out the evangelical counsels of, poverty, chastity, obedience in our lay state. We're supposed to do that as best we can, take on lives of penance, build our own communities, sing the hours, do all these things, and that's what's going to foster community and create like this welcoming environment. Because I just don't think it's going to happen at the average parish. Not saying there's no parishes where it can happen. Obviously, I think the traditional communities are in a similar boat to like the Eastern Orthodox, in that they're a lot smaller, tight knit, and so that can be fostered. But in terms of like the average parish, where the vast majority of Catholics actually are, I just don't see that happening anytime soon. So kind of a long-winded answer to that initial question about how do we foster community in the Catholic world. Honestly, I don't know. I'm still figuring out myself. Like I lead a men's Bible study. I've taught a lot of my guys how to like chant the divine office. I try to hold a lot of events at my house, to try and like build that community. But at the end of the day, one person can only do so much. We need other people to take up that torch and start leading the way in that respect. So, yeah.